Hi kids, let me guess, you're about ready for Christmas vacation, aren't you? You're probably tired of spelling lessons and history lessons and math lessons. Ugh. Well, what if I told you there were a group of kids that were just like you, but when they went to school, they learned anything but your typical spelling, history, and math. They get to do fun things all day long. Do you want to hear more? Well, you'll have to read and Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Louis Sachar. And in this story, it talks about a school that was built incorrectly. The builders said they were very sorry. But instead of having a one-story school with 30 classrooms on each floor, in each room, it was built 30 stories high with one classroom on each story. And in this book, it's about the kids that are on the very top floor, the 30th floor. So this book is about 30 stories of the 30 students in this class. What are the things that you'll learn about here? Well, you'll read about a teacher, Mrs. Gorf, who's the meanest teacher in the whole school, and why she turns kids into apples. You'll also learn how to read upside down. You'll learn about what Joe-flavored ice cream tastes like and what Mauricia-flavored ice cream tastes like. And you'll also learn why Mrs. Jewls ended up replacing mean old Mrs. Gorf. And why is Mrs. Jewls so cool? Well, here's an example. Sherry is one of the kids in the class. She weighs only 49 pounds, but she wears a 35-pound coat. And Sherry sleeps a lot. So this is what happens when Sherry sleeps. Sherry often fell asleep in class. Mrs. Jewls didn't mind that either. She said that a lot of people do their best learning when they are asleep. Sherry spent all of her time either looking out the window or sleeping. Mrs. Jewls thought she was one of the best kids in the class. One afternoon it was very hot and all the windows were open. Yet Sherry still wore her red and blue overcoat. The heat made her very tired. Mrs. Jewls was teaching arithmetic. Sherry pulled the hood up over her face, buried herself in the coat, and went to sleep. "Mrs. Jewls," said Kathy, "Sherry's asleep." "That's good," said Mrs. Jewls. "She must be learning something." Sherry began to snore. "Mrs. Jewls, Sherry is snoring," Kathy said. "Yes, I can hear her," said Mrs. Jewls. "She must be learning an awful lot today. I wish the rest of you could be like Sherry." Next, we have more stories about Wayside School. And this is Wayside School is Falling Down. And these are more wacky and hilarious stories of the kids that go to Wayside School. We'll find out that Mrs. Gorf, remember her? She was the mean old teacher from the first class. She returns in this story. She's a ghost. She also is a face in the mashed potatoes that Miss Mush serves the kids. You'll learn why is chapter 17 written backwards. And you'll be introduced to Miss Mush and her mushroom surprise. And why is her food so bad? The beginning of the chapter with Miss Mush, there's a warning. Do not read this story right after eating. In fact, don't read it right before eating either. In fact, just to be safe, don't read this story if you ever plan on eating again. Now this chapter is about Ron. Poor Ron forgot his lunch at home, so he had to order a mushroom surprise from Miss Mush. What happened? Well, Ron dug his plastic fork into the goop. He raised it to his mouth. Dana covered her eyes. "I can't watch," she exclaimed. Ron opened his mouth wide. The fork entered. He brought the fork out again. It was empty. Ron chewed twice, then swallowed. "He ate it," Dee Dee announced for those who couldn't see. Stephen screamed. Said Ron. Not too bad. It sort of tastes like a mixture of bananas and spinach. Ron looked at Dee Dee. His face flushed, and his eyes changed color. His whole body began to shake, like a washing machine on spin cycle. Dee Dee was afraid he was going to throw up. She tried to get away, but with everyone crowded around, there was no room for her to move. But Ron didn't throw up. He stood up, put his arms around Dee Dee's neck, and kissed her smack on the lips. He sat back down. His eyes returned to their normal color. Yuck, said Dee Dee, wiping her mouth on her sleeve. What's the matter? Said Ron. Don't you know what you just did? He shrugged. I ate some mushroom surprise, and it wasn't bad. That's what happens when you eat Miss Mush's food. You'll also learn in this book, Wayside School is Falling Down, that on picture day, people wear three-piece suits, cowboy pajamas, and togas made from bed sheets. And why is Wayside School falling down? Well, I'll tell you. It has to do with a cowbell and a herd of cows, but you'll have to read it to find out what actually happens. And the last book I'm going to share with you is Sideways Arithmetic from Wayside School. So you're probably thinking, this sounds like a school I want to go to. Well, in this book, Sue does. She's like a kid like you, and she ends up coming to Wayside School. Sue was very excited to be at Wayside School in Mrs. Jewell's class. She was surrounded by all the kids she had read about in her favorite book, Sideways Stories from Wayside School. She sat next to Rondi. Everyone take out your spelling book, said Mrs. Jewell. It's time for arithmetic. Huh? Said Sue. She didn't know why you'd need spelling books to do arithmetic. Mrs. Jewell wrote the first problem on the blackboard. Elf plus elf. How much is elf plus elf? Allison raised her hand. Fool! Mrs. Jewell smiled. Very good, she said, and she wrote the answer on the blackboard under the problem. Elf plus elf equals fool. You'll also learn why mom plus mop equals yo-yo, and you'll also read about a problem with Miss Mush. So, do you want to hear more about these funny antics of these kids? Learn how Sue did when she went to Wayside School. Who is Mrs. Arves, and where's the 19th floor? And why missing items always end up in the fridge? You'll have to read these stories to find out.